the transfer portal was part of your opinion here of trying to move forward a bit, of course. And look, we were told that last week. One reason for not buying Billy Napier out was to use this money to attack the transfer portal. That's supposed to be a big part of moving forward with Billy Napier. We'll see how that comes about. But Napier was asked about his approach to the transfer portal. Here's what he had to say.
The landscape of college sports right now, how much of that has to occur now during the season when you are trying to prepare for games? Are you already at a point where you're looking at potential guys who have a future in the portal, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is definitely a piece of the puzzle here down the stretch. I think the combination of early signing period and the portal window paired with November football and how competitive and important these games are, that is one of the more challenging things about college football right now. And I think every coach has expressed that publicly. So we have extensive, our personnel department is working around the clock. We have windows of time where we evaluate players every week. Just this week, I'll be up here Wednesday night. I'll be up here early Friday morning. Those are my 2 blocks of time each week. So those guys are grinding around the clock, and then obviously the coaches as well, and then that gets funneled to me. So, yeah, 2 times a week we have blocks for evaluating players, and what you're describing, it becomes even more, there's just more, whatever you want to call it, rumors or anticipation. I think some of that starts to ramp up in November.
Tamper. That's all I got to say. I know you're not supposed to do it, but we all know it happens. So I'm not. We're not going to dig our heads in the sand there. Will, that came on the heels of Billy Napier. He was asked about the quarterback depth, of course, and now Florida having gone to a walk-on, and Clay Millen is the 4th quarterback, and will he ever get a shot? We don't know. But it was coming off the heels of that. Billy Napier basically saying, he wants 4 quarterbacks. That's what he said last year when discussing the quarterback spot. But also, saying, we know we're going to have to hit that position in the transfer portal. And then he gave this overall arcing, kind of their plan. Meets 2 times a week for the transfer portal. Certainly glad to hear that. This new world of college football, we know players are going to be moving left and right, maybe even more so now before, I can see this transfer portal window will being pretty crazy because of maybe some of the restrictions that are going to be coming up with the transfer portal and, the revenue sharing. And is that going to cause some kind of contracts to be in place, and guys are now have to be held accountable and maybe have to stay out of school or, however that's going to work out. This could be the last time the transfer portal is as free as it has been. So we could see major movement here with the transfer portal. But certainly when you look at Florida, Will, I know you kind of went to the defensive side of it. And, of course, you mentioned it earlier, Florida just needs better players on that side. But you start looking ahead, and you brought up an interesting point is how do you weigh these last 3 games to close out the season? Like I said, we all want to go win these games. Is there a balance of getting guys ready for next year? And then you're going to have to hit the transfer portal for potentially a few offensive linemen because you could be losing a few. Defensive linemen, you're going to have to bring a whole lot of experience to the transfer portal there. You lose Chimere DK and Elijah Badger out of transfer portal or out of the wide receiver room. You're going to have to hit the portal there as well. Billy Napier already said they'll be looking for quarterbacks out of the portal too. You can get a kind of inkling already of we've watched this team through 9 games now of where Florida in just a month is going to have to start bringing players in.
Yeah, they're gonna. So you didn't even mention retaining their own guys.
That's true.
Who might decide they want to go someplace as well. Now, I think when you look at the defensive side of the ball, you can wonder how many of those guys you really want to retain. And there's some guys there that you wouldn't want to see walk, and there's a lot that Florida is going to have to do in the transfer portal. Certainly there was the announcement that one of the rationales for not letting Napier go was you can redirect that buyout money to the transfer portal. Duh, but I'm not sure that's something you necessarily want to say. Like, out loud because you've kind of blown any kind of leverage you had.
Yeah, we had
the
that
entire
conversation on the Gators Breakdown Plus Discord. First of all, okay, now everybody out there knows, okay, Florida's going to be quote unquote maybe desperate. And what about the players that are currently on the roster? Okay, we know you're going to go spend all this money on the outside. What about us guys on the inside that are already in orange and blue?
I mean, I don't know. The guys who are already in orange and blue have got to be getting tired of getting their butts kicked. So I would imagine that they would welcome guys who are going to come in, as long as it's not their position, right? That they would welcome guys who are going to come in and help them win. Look, Napier has one needle to thread here, and that is get a Jaden Daniels-esque season from DJ Lagway next year with a defense that is not putrid. And so we can talk about offensive linemen, and yeah, they'll bring in some of those guys. We can talk about, do they need reinforcements at wide receiver? Absolutely. But I think offensive guys are probably going to say, you know what, if the money's right, the offensive side of the ball with DJ Lagway, I'm in for that. Yeah. The question I have is what do you sell on the defensive side of the ball, given what Florida's defense has been for the last 3 years? I mean, this year is the best defense that Florida has had in the Billy Napier era, and they're 87th in yards per play allowed against FBS opponents. They're bad, and it's the third year in a row that they're bad. So, 3 different defensive coordinators over those 3 years. They brought in all sorts of new guys. You think about the guys who were there 2 years ago, and now who do they have now? There's no more Rashad Torrance. There's no more there's no more the guys who were there as Napier or as Mullen holdovers. These are all Billy Napier's guys that he's brought in. The Asa Turners, the DJ Douglases, the Triquez Bridges, the Pup Howards, Shamar Jameses. The only guy left from Mullen at this point is Jason Marshall, and he was the best player on the field up until he got injured. And so what do you have to sell beyond the money is the thing that I think they're probably going to struggle with, because yes, I want a great NIL deal, but if I'm a great player, like if I'm a player, like I was talking about earlier, somebody that people have to game plan around, I want someone who's going to get me the NFL, because it's not just the payout at Florida that matters. It's also the payout if you can get me into a first or second round draft pick. It's the payout if you can put me in a situation where I get a good second contract in the NFL. It's a place where if I learn a ton, then I have now positioned myself to be really valuable to the next level. Those are the conversations that I would be having if I were a recruit trying to decide, or a transfer trying to decide where to go. Because the reality is that there are going to be other programs that have things to sell. Like if Dan Lanning comes calling at Oregon and says, I need you for my defense, what do you say? If Ryan Day comes and says, I need you at Ohio State, if Dabo Swinney finally decides to actually use the transfer portal and says, hey, I need you. Kirby Smart, obviously. You've got DeBoer at Alabama. You got Cristobal down at Miami.
Yeah, I said that last week. This is going to be a great test subject of results on the field versus if all this reports of NIL are going to be spent and there's heavy money involved for Florida, what's the dynamic going to be between the two of money, and results on the field?
This is fundamentally actually why the Napier retention and the vote of confidence and all that stuff actually bother me more than anything. It's because the Florida team has no identity. And there's nowhere where I can point to in the program where Florida is differentiated over another program out there. Like, when it comes to NIL, we're going to spend a bunch of money. Texas A&M's been spending money on NIL for 4 years. So all you've really done is said, hey, we're going to catch up with all these other guys who are out there. And I'm like, that's great. Like it's better than what it has been, right? Obviously, but all it's going to do is help catch you up with everyone else. Now, the question I have, and I don't know that we'll know the answer to this because they don't give out contracts and NIL numbers and those sorts of things. The only time we know is when something gets screwed up. Then we usually know how much somebody's making. But therein, again, the Rashada aspect, like I actually have no problem with the PR and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it sucks, but like the problem with the Rashada saga is that they offered him $14 million. And money is not like money's fungible. If you use it for one player, you can use it for another, or if you don't use it for one player, you can use it for another. So do I have confidence that this staff understands how to value players in a way where they will be, and they're going to have to outbid some people, but you don't have to outbid them by $36 million.
Yeah.
Like, you need to outbid them by.
Go ahead, Will. I'm sorry.
Well, you just need to outbid them by some amount, right? And so,
Well,
I remember the rumors going around where that Rashada was like 8 or 8.5 million, and all of a sudden it's 14. You're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like 8 or 8.5 was way too much. 14 is ludicrous. And so, again, I go back to. It's like when everybody's like, well, we get up at 4 a.m. and lift weights. So does everybody else out there. You haven't gained any differentiation by having a strength coach who doesn't have you doing yoga. Like, you've now just caught up to everyone else. And so that's my big concern with all of this stuff, is that Florida is essentially saying, well, we're going to use the buyout money and catch up to everybody else. But now you're doing it in a situation where the thing you have to sell is you are a mercenary coming to the University of Florida to help save Billy Napier's job. And if you don't play well as a mercenary, well, then Napier's going to be gone, and the coach that you committed to isn't going to be here any longer. It's going to take extra money to get somebody to do that over some of these other programs that he might be able to go to. So, look, if they'd have said, we don't want to buy out Billy Napier, here's what the buyout would be 3 years ago, then I'd be like, cool, like everybody was aligned at that point. But this idea that we're going to justify not getting rid of him because we can reallocate those funds someplace else, to me just means congratulations. You've now caught up to Alabama in terms of overall funds. Napier needs to be meeting 4 days a week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week on whatever's going on in the transfer portal. Because, I mean, honestly, and we've seen it already, like basically you've got half the fan base who looks at it and goes, well, we just got blasted by Texas. Everything's hopeless. And then you got the other half of the fan base that goes, well, we just got blasted by Texas. Must have been the injuries. Like,
yeah.
like, I mean, if he went 0-3 for the rest of the games this year, does it change the way people feel about the program overall? I mean, I guess 4-8 would change the way some people would think.
And losing to this Florida State team?
I mean, I think it would ramp up the noise, but if you're keeping him till next year,
yeah,
the only thing that matters is what happens next year.
Right.
And I know he's not necessarily going to say this in the press conference, but I hope behind the scenes it's 6 hours a day on transfer portal, 2 hours a day on football preparation, because it looks like they're only spending 2 of every 8 hours on football preparation anyway when it comes to special teams and having 12 guys on the field and all that sort of stuff, which, and they need the transfer. Like, that has to be a place that they hit, which unfortunately means they're probably going to ignore the 2025 recruiting class at the high school level in terms of having those funds allocated. And that is one of my worries.
Because it has to be instant impact. Like,
well, exactly. And the only way you do that is with 5-star guys, and all the 5-star guys have already committed.
Yeah.
So unless you're going to come in off the top rope and start offering these 5-star guys, like, well, no, I mean, if they end up with 4 5-stars in the 2025 class, we'll be like, oh, that money got allocated properly, or at least it got allocated on the proper players. I don't know if it got allocated completely properly, but you're going to have to flip some guys early signing day, the same way guys got flipped last year. But, again, this was one of the things I wrote in my article about Napier's retention is that if you look at the guys who flipped from Florida, Xavier Filsaime was the best player who got flipped from Florida's class, and he was 39th overall. You're not flipping the 4th guy in the country on the last day with an NIL offer at this point. Ohio State is offering the same amount of money that you are. And so you got to offer Ohio State plus. Either that's plus money, plus playing time.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Right,
that's what I was going to say earlier. There's a Florida tax right now because of the results on the field.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have
Napier tariff.
Yeah, you're going to have to overspend. That's just how it is.
Yeah. So maybe 45 million instead of 23 is what we need to round out this class. I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong tab there. And Big Blue comes up to this. He brings up a good point, and everybody has said it about Florida State and all that, because you cannot build long-term success in the portal. You have to recruit and win at the high school battle. At the high school level. We've been saying that for years. The hole's dug too deep now, where you have to attack the transfer. That's his only way out of this. Like, yes, there's a young nucleus of players. We've all admitted that. We know that. That young nucleus is not winning Florida at 9-10 games next year. That young nucleus plus a really, really good portal haul is what's going to win the 9-10 games next year if that's on the table. So Napier's dug the hole where he has to. The high school recruiting hadn't been good enough. So now he has to turn to the transfer portal. And that's why so many of us begged early on in the process was hit the transfer portal to get the wins early, and then the high school recruiting can take over. Now, to me, yeah, it is a little bit backwards, and maybe if you can start putting some wins together, if it's a 2-year plan with enough wins next year, you get that, and you can start building your high school recruiting back up. But the way this thing is played out, he has to hit the transfer portal to have some success next year.
Well, and this is where I think people need to be careful, especially those people who are making an argument that they don't want to start over again.
Yeah.
Because I think the concern that I have is that if you go whole hog on the portal, but you neglect your 2025 class, the whole rationale for not wanting to start over again is that you don't want to have that 2025 class fall apart with a transition to a new coach, and that new coach is an unknown. At the same time, I look at it and I go, you're going to neglect the 2025 high school class because of the transfer portal class that you have to bring in anyway. And so if you have to make a change after this year or after next year, then you'll be looking at a neglected 25 class plus a transition 26 class. And it's even worse, right? You sort of just kick the can down the road. The other thing is we don't have to look too far. You got to look about 2 hours northwest of Florida to see what happens when you have a quarterback papering over all the holes that you're able to sort of fill up those holes with transfer portal guys. And then all those guys leave along with the quarterback. And oh boy, what happens to a program then? The bottom has completely fallen out in Tallahassee. And it was completely foreseeable because the exact same thing happened, right? They allocated all of their NIL funds, all of their emphasis, all of that stuff on the transfer portal. And Jordan Travis was good enough to cover up a bunch of those holes. I mean, a couple of years ago when Travis was running all over the place, when Florida seemed to have him sacked 30 times that game, and he's running all over. That's a game Florida should have won.
Yeah.
And they didn't win because of Jordan Travis, because Jordan Travis was playing quarterback. And when Travis got injured, we saw what happened to Florida State last year on the offensive side of the ball, the last couple of games, and certainly in that game against Georgia. And now we've seen what happens this year. They bring in Uiagalelei, who is not a terrible player, but he's like Nussmeier. He's below average overall, and he's a game manager. And you bring in a game manager with substandard high school recruits who didn't get any playing time because the transfers were in there taking up all the playing time. And all of a sudden, what do you have? You have a really young team with substandard quarterback play. That quarterback gets injured and the whole season goes to hell. And so, look, I think that there is something to be said for going and absolutely whole hog on the transfer portal because of where Billy Napier's at. But there's a moral hazard here. And you see this all the time with general managers who are about to get fired in the NFL or in Major League Baseball or any other professional sport, where they go on like a spending spree before the season starts because they know they're gone and don't have to deal with the ramifications of the contracts. Because if they don't win, now if they win, then they got to deal with the ramifications of the contracts. So Mike Norvell gets his extension this offseason, and now he's got to deal with the ramifications of selling his soul to the devil last year in order to get that 13-1 season. But he got the extension, right? He was able to get what he needed in order to do it. If Florida State had gone 8-5 last year, there's no way he survives this season. Right. And so that's the calculus right now for Billy Napier and Scott Strickland in some ways too. But there's a moral hazard here where these guys are going to mortgage the future because they have to win now. And yeah, you can't build a program long-term that way. That just happens to be the corner that Billy Napier is putting himself in and has put himself in, not because of what's happened now, not because the fans have gotten loud at the lack of wins, but because of exactly what you said, that they were slow on the transfer portal to start with, that they were not elite at the high school recruiting level to start with, that they've been slow on NIL overall, that they've had some snafus with NIL overall. And the high school recruiting hasn't been there at an elite level. The transfer portal, they've been somewhat effective there, but that has not been, they don't have massive game changers who've come out of the transfer portal. And, it's just the the risk profile of this program, it's like redlining right now. And my worry is you pour all this money in there, all of a sudden the engine's going to break. And when the engine breaks, Billy Napier ain't going to be here to clean it up. You're going to have somebody else here to clean it up.
That's the thing. What choice does he have? I mean,
well, Napier has no choice. The program has a choice.
Right, true. Well, I mean, with the decision already made, that's just stressful.
I mean, look, people respond to incentives.
Yeah.
And so if I was in Napier's situation right now and somebody handed me $25 million to spend and said, you get to stay here if you win next year and you're gone if you don't, what am I doing? Like, it's obvious what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and try to find, essentially a Graham Mertz at every position, right? The guy who's a fifth-year guy who's going to come in and is going to be able, and I know he's a solid guy and he's going to be able to. Now that might be my concern too, is that Graham Mertz is a perfect quarterback for a system that has Alabama level talent around it. I think for a team like Florida, Graham Mertz is not the perfect fit for that because of that. And so I'd say the same thing at middle linebacker, corner, safety. Like, Florida is not devoid of guys who are good teammates, good culture guys, guys who work hard in the weight room, like those sorts of things. I don't think what Florida's devoid of is Sean Taylor. Like, they don't have a guy at safety who just changes the game. They don't have a guy at linebacker who just changes the game. They don't have a guy at defensive end who just changes the game. And you don't have to look too far. Ole Miss had a guy whipping around the corner the other day against Georgia who was a Gator at one time or another. And
I was told he wouldn't be missed. And I was so against that. But,
it turns out when you lose your best pass rusher, even if he's not perfect, that does have an impact.